Welcome to Science Talk. As most of you know, that Earth is warming, temperature is increasing, our planet is heating or overheating, sea level is rising, and we are not doing as much as we should be doing to stop this madness as a human-made disaster. Don't listen to me or don't believe me, whatever I have to say, but listen to my today's guest, who is world-renowned climate scientist, or sometime he refer himself his introduction as a data scientist who uses data to predict and model climate changes and how the Earth ecosystem change over time. And he works at NASA at one of the JPL as a lab, and he uses satellite data and models to study rapidly changing Earth, focusing on extreme heat and human health, ecosystem breakdown, and severe weather. He has a PhD in physics from Columbia University and a BA from Harvard University, where I'm sitting right now in the Harvard School of Public Health. So, without further delay, I would like to introduce and welcome my guest, Dr. Peter Kalmus. And Dr. Peter, thank you so much for joining me today, and welcome to Science Talk.
Thanks for having me. I should say I'm speaking on my own behalf too.
Yes, so he is speaking on his behalf, and these views, of course, does not represent NASA or Harvard, where I'm sitting right now. So it's our own views, whatever we have to say in this
Right?
podcast.
Which is kind of a shame because in my opinion, our institutions should be taking a firmer stance since the fate of our planet is at stake here.
Yeah, absolutely. I was literally thinking about that yesterday. It's like, you know what? These oil and gas companies, they pay a lot to their PR firms to lobby and to do propaganda, and they own that. And when we
Mhm.
talk about climate change, our institutions do not own that opinion, which is kind of sad, as you said.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's this kind of interesting separation of powers that the formation of institutions kind of facilitate, where um, the status quo is very preserved by this dynamic, right? It's very hard to get institutions to make like very quick changes or to respond to something new coming that wasn't there when they formed, right? So um yeah, I don't know, like you something about the hierarchy and then like the people who are the directors, they're kind of chosen because they're somewhat conservative in their views and they're stable, they bring stability to the institution. And so then you have all these rules where the kind of working people in this institution might want to blow some whistles, but they're really suppressed. So it is a very interesting
Yeah, and that
dynamic.
might be the reason that the scientists are not very effective convincing people, or they do not have as much influence, because the other side knows that, oh, these are professors, bunch of scientists who are going to say things, but their institutions do not support that opinion. So maybe they don't have to act and it doesn't matter much as compared to if the institution itself take a position and, do the same thing.
Right. And the institutions, I'm thinking of like Harvard's a good example recently with, this Trump administration putting pressure on the American Geophysical Union has kind of been very close to the fossil fuel industry for a very long time because some of its members are geo scientists who are like involved in drilling for fossil fuels and so forth. And the institutions, the heads of the institutions need to be, and this is true of JPL as well, of course, like they have to be savvy of funding, right? So they have, if you're the director of this big institution and you have a few thousand employees, it's like a lot of mouths to feed, and you have to be really careful to make sure the funding keeps flowing. So, you can't piss off, for example, an administration or a Congress who might not, whether they believe climate change is actually happening or whether they just say that, it's immaterial, right? Their position is climate change isn't happening, and they want to tamp down anyone who says that it really is. So that puts the director of these institutions in a hard place, right? And we saw this similarly with Harvard when the administration was saying like you have to do X, Y, and Z, otherwise we're gonna. So it's a form of extortion, right? Financial extortion, essentially, and it forces these institutions to maybe make not the best long-term decisions for the planet and humanity, right? So we're kind of, it's like a mob mentality where like in a sense all of humanity is being ransomed by like this class of people, very, very rich people who don't want to change social structures and who don't want us to do something about climate change.
Absolutely. So
It's a
yeah,
very tough position.
yeah, it is. It is, and that's the irony of our time we're
Yeah.
living in. And so you have explained this question in the BBC video, in the Wired, and a lot of other places. But like, can you talk a little bit about like what is, in a layman terms, so people understand what is climate change and why our planet is overheating?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've gotten sort of more interested in thinking about the social structures and how we can stop this because I do feel like at some level we have enough science to know what we should be doing and we're not doing. But at a very basic level, when you burn fossil fuels, so oil, gas, coal, you're combusting that with oxygen and creating there are these carbon chain molecules, right? It's this stored energy, basically stored energy of the sun, like locked up in these carbon chains. You combust it with oxygen, turns into carbon dioxide. That goes into the atmosphere. And the carbon dioxide molecule interacts with infrared radiation quantum mechanically. So just the vibrational modes of the CO2 molecule, which is, one carbon, two oxygens in a certain configuration, vibrates in a particular way, interacts with infrared radiation that's coming out from the Earth, right? So if you think from the planet's point of view, there's two big ways that the planet interacts energetically with space, right? You've got the sun, you've got sunlight coming in, and that heats the planet up, of course, because the planet's absorbing that sunlight. And then the planet emits infrared radiation in what's called a black body. So anything with temperature is emitting, like our bodies, if you look at our bodies with an infrared camera, we're emitting infrared radiation because um, a particular body at a particular temperature emits radiation following a particular spectrum, right? So that infrared radiation coming from the Earth's surface, coming from the atmosphere, coming from the clouds, is going back out into space. But those extra CO2 molecules trap that outgoing infrared radiation. So not as much of it gets to space. Some of it gets re-emitted back down to Earth, right? So you got the same amount of sunlight coming in, less infrared radiation going out. The temperature of the planet has to increase. And then the hotter planet is going to emit more infrared radiation. So you'll come back into equilibrium with the sunlight, but at a hotter temperature. But of course, we're not at the point of coming back into equilibrium yet because we're still burning more fossil fuels. So that's how the science works in a nutshell. And we've known about this since the 1800s. So
And
it's been
we keep emitting those carbon emissions into the air and space. We're not stopping because if we want to reverse the climate change impacts, we have to take that uh, emission out of the space which we already emit,
right.
right?
Yeah, and it's much, much harder to do that than the fossil fuel industry would lead you to believe. So they talk about things like direct air capture, carbon capture, like basically using energy inputs to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. You would essentially there, a few years ago, there was a big facility in I think Iceland that they made to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. And I think, I'm not sure if it's still up or not. I haven't really kept tabs on it. But at the time, it opened to much fanfare. And they said how much CO2 they could pull out of the
Yeah.
atmosphere. And I was like, in 1 year, this thing is going to pull out 3 seconds worth of carbon emissions. So what humanity emits in 3 seconds, it would take this thing a whole year
Yeah.
to pull out of that atmosphere. So you need millions and millions of those facilities. So that lets you know the scale. And then there's, I don't see many people point this out, but there's a huge ethical problem with this, right? It's like you're going out to dinner with your grandchildren and it was really fancy, sumptuous dinner. And then you just walk up and leave and like leave them with the bill. Because it's like saying we can emit now because our kids and our grandkids are going to spend most of their money, most of their economic activity is going to have to be in building these, like millions and millions of these carbon plants to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere. And that's going to be hugely expensive for them, but it means we can emit now. So we're going to like keep partying and just like leave the next generation with the bill. It's deeply, deeply irresponsible. And the children, the next generation, the grandkids, they're going to have to, pay this bill. at the same time that the earth is breaking down around them
Yeah,
because of the party that we had. So they're going to be having more hurricanes, more fires, more heat waves, more floods, right? Their crops are going to be failing
yeah,
more
absolutely.
because of the planet being hotter. And yet we're expecting them to build all this huge carbon capture infrastructure. So it's so it's pretty evil. The linchpin for me on how evil it is of the fossil fuel industries to suggest this as, is it's a cynical ploy because it sounds good to a lot of people, right? So
Absolutely.
it's a form of propaganda.
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry, I had to
no,
do
no,
that little.
absolutely. I think that that's a great point to kind of having those discussions with the family members and with loved ones. And, because a lot of time we work as a scientist, but like even our own families do not believe that we're gonna leave that bill for the future generations, right? So
Right.
we're not telling them like, oh, like we're gonna having a party and this is like the bill you're gonna pay. But it's like, oh, we'll deal with that when the time comes, right? So like how do you kind of talk with people within your own family who do not believe in climate change and who do not believe in that
Hmm.
bill because they haven't seen that bill yet.
Oh, excellent, excellent question. Sadly, I haven't made a lot of progress. So I have not convinced a lot of people who are deep in climate denial to
Mhm.
come out of that climate denial. It's surprisingly hard to get somebody to change their mind when they don't approach things like a scientist. So
Yeah.
by that I mean, if somebody's not willing to let new information
I mean,
cause them to change their mind, it's very, very hard to get them to change their minds. So I'm hoping that that farmers, for example, they tend to be more on the conservative side, but they have to be on the vanguard of conservatives who realize that climate change is really happening, right? Because maybe they can't grow the same crops that they used to grow, or maybe
yes.
now the planting dates have changed by several weeks, So uh, I'm kind of hoping that they'll start speaking up pretty soon.
Yeah,
But
that's a great point. Because I just had actually last night a discussion with somebody. We have a climate action week this week at Harvard, and one of the attendees, he was talking about. He's like, you know what? Where we should start about climate change is the farmers. It's like, why is that? He's like, because
mm,
they're seeing that they're not able to grow the same crops. The crops are not, like holding up to the extreme weathers, so they are the one who, some of them are like really educated, some of them who are not educated, but they see the impacts of climate change because they've been doing the same work over generations or over 30, 40 years. So they see, oh, like for example, I was not able to like, grow these crops because of the change in pattern and like flooding and all these things. That's like, oh, that's actually a great point. But as you said, they're not like, we're not seeing much information coming from farmers saying that we are seeing this on social media, on mainstream media. It seems like that's the ignored part, and that may be because of the mass production of corporate farming. And we don't believe in this, like those farmers who used to grow their crops and everything, and now it's like everything is corporatized kind of way that it's a mass production of things.
yeah, and the elephant in the room is the Trump administration and the Republican Party. So if you're a Republican farmer
Hmm?
and you're like hearing all of this, frankly, propaganda, these lies from the Republican Party about climate change not really happening and it being like a liberal or a Chinese hoax or whatever, um, that's a kind of gaslighting, right? Because they're telling you, don't believe your own eyes.
Hmm?
So my question is to Republican farmers, like when do you start believing your own eyes and saying the emperor has no clothes, right? That you guys are full of crap.
Yeah.
Because I'm seeing the temperatures increasing, I'm
Yes.
seeing changes in rainfall patterns. I have to change my farming
Yeah.
methods,
Hmm?
and it's not just a 1 year thing. It's been a trend over several decades. Um, so yeah, I'm really curious about that. You know, before this administration came back into power, I was sort of thinking that there would be some point in the near future where the conservatives, the Republicans, would start to say like, "Hey, our leaders are wrong about climate change, it's really happening. And then suddenly the like Republican politicians would start, would stop telling them these lies. But that certainly hasn't happened yet. And
Yeah.
if anything, we're in an even deeper hole in terms of, the ultimate distraction to worrying, to thinking about climate change and to wanting to solve it is to, basically for you to feel that democracy is threatened. So I don't think very many people are talking about
So, like,
climate
yeah, I
change.
mean, I wanted to ask that question later, but like now it's a good transition to ask that question. It's like, yes, we know the climate deniers are in power and they're not going to believe it and they're going to spew that propaganda. But on the other side, if we look at the Democrats, if we look at the Democratic Party, they do not have a very progressive, very active agenda on climate adaptation or mitigation either. So where do we go? Honestly, like I've been like talking to other people. I think you had a chat with Dan Miller on a climate chat a while ago. He was also talking. He's like, I'm not like super optimist or hopeful from a Democratic Party either. So it's just not
Yeah.
like the one side, but the other side is like also they're just using it, but like they're not doing anything.
Yeah, Muhammad, this is the hell I've been living in for 20 years, basically. So even when we've had Democrat presidents, they have done very, very little to stop climate change. President Obama, after he left office, he actually bragged at a lecture that he was the guy who increased the production of oil and gas in America. So I think his exact quote was like, "That was me, folks," or something like that. So he wasn't interested after 8 years of being in office.
Mhm.
President Obama was not interested in taking credit for, doing something about climate change. He was much more eager to take credit for making climate change worse by increasing oil and gas production in the United States. And then President Biden, I would write op-ed after op-ed, urging him to declare a climate emergency, and that never happened. I am pretty I'm convinced personally that the recent Democratic presidents just didn't really understand at a core level how serious climate change actually is for the future of humanity. So in other words, they just didn't get it. And maybe it's to put yourself into their shoes. Like they I think they're kind of forced to think in terms of the short term, and they have all these corporate donors, so they have to think about winning elections, right? So it's very hard for them, maybe even if they did care at a personal level, which again I don't really think they did, but if you were a Democratic president, for example, and you really really wanted to do something about climate change, it might be, I think you could do more than recent Democratic presidents have done, but I think your hands would be pretty tied in a lot of ways based on the system as it's structured in the United States right now, which is a huge shame.
Yeah, and
So
it's I think one of the potential reason or probable reason is that somebody was saying the other day, talking about climate change, that politicians hate fundraising. And when it comes in a chunk like 2 million, 3, 5 million from anyone from corporate sector, they love it, but they hate asking you for $10, $20, 2,000, 5,000. So it's easier for them to take money from these corporations and oil and gas companies, and not to think about like voters who are gonna donate $10 or $15 because they don't like that. So maybe that's
right.
part of the reason that like I don't know, but like maybe that they go with that always, regardless
Yeah.
who's in the
You,
power.
you see this with mainstream media too, right? So again, it's like what we were talking about at the beginning, this sort of institutional inertia. You see the New York Times, for example, running all kinds of ads all the time for fossil fuel
Yeah.
corporations, which I think causes them to be more biased in their reporting. And so I don't feel like they typically, even the New York Times doesn't typically tell the whole truth about climate change when they're reporting on, for example, a devastating flood. They don't typically say the reason this is happening is because the planet's getting hotter. The reason the planet's getting hotter is because of the fossil fuel industry. The fossil fuel industry has been intentionally blocking action, which is why we're in this predicament, which is going to get much worse, right? So I always say there's three really key parts to any climate change disaster story, which typically get left out by journalists, even respected institutions like the New York Times. Those three things are this is caused by the fossil fuel industry.
Mhm.
The fossil fuel industry has been lying for decades and blocking action intentionally, right? Which is part of the story. That's why that's a big part of
That's the
why this
context.
disaster
That's the
just
full
happened.
context. Yes.
Right. Yeah. Say there's a huge hurricane that wipes out a city. Like the reader's going to want to know why. And the article doesn't even talk about fossil fuels, doesn't talk about the fact that the fossil fuel industry has been lying and blocking action, which is maybe if they hadn't been lying and blocking action, that hurricane would not have happened. Right. And then the third thing that they typically don't say, sometimes they do say this third thing, but they need to let readers know that let the public know that this is going to get worse and worse,
Mhm.
obviously, until we stop burning fossil fuels. And I want your listeners to know that, and I don't think this is well appreciated by the public, that when you burn fossil fuels, you can think of it as like a ratchet. Like every little bit that you burn, every piece chunk of coal, every gallon of gas, it's like a little ratchet making the planet a tiny bit hotter, effectively permanently, right? So however hot the planet gets is pretty much how hot it's going to stay to first order. Um, and the more as we burn more and more fossil fuel, that temperature is going to go up. So it's not a question of reducing our fossil fuel use. It's a question of ending it completely, right? Which is why this is such a hard problem.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and the last thing your prompt made me think of is that, it's very hard to see right now how we're going to get strong laws
Mhm.
in the near future from Congress in the United States that will directly do things to transition us away from fossil fuels and towards, say, electric powered vehicles and other alternatives that will end our reliance on fossil fuels. But what's kind of encouraging is that I think the technologies that we need to transition away from fossil fuels, for example, solar panels and battery storage, they've gotten so much cheaper,
Mhm.
so much more quickly than anyone predicted, say like 10 years ago, that now it's insane to like produce electricity really any other way, right?
Yeah.
And China gets this. So China is eating our lunch right now because the economy of the future is not going to run on fossil fuels. It's going to run on electricity produced by solar panels, right? And so that's the thing I think that's ultimately going to limit how hot the planet gets from global heating. And right now, unfortunately, we have an administration that, like little toddlers throwing a tantrum,
Mhm.
they're doing everything they can to block the adoption of these technologies, which are obviously superior in every way, and they're even cheaper now.
Yeah.
And I think it's mainly because um, well, it's for a lot of reasons, right? So you have legacy billionaires who want fossil fuels to continue because that's why they're so rich in the first place, and their families go back many generations. That if everyone can make their own electricity,
Mhm.
if it's like distributed, then that's sort of a loss of control, right?
Yes.
So, maybe that's me just being a little
Oh,
bit,
absolutely.
yeah. But
Yeah.
but to me, that's one of the great things about it is that, it's something that anyone can control. You don't have to worry about some other entity like shutting off your power. So,
Yeah, I think like the Congress is right now is like too busy, like kind of trying to protect free speech and is burning a flag constitute a free speech or not. They're like too busy doing that kind of stuff, but not worried about the hurricanes and flooding and heat waves
right.
we're seeing more frequent and more intense. For example, right now, I'm originally from Pakistan and we have a huge devastating flooding right now where millions of
Yeah.
people are displaced and like we saw like the worst flooding in 2022 where like
Yeah.
33% of the country was underwater,
Unbelievable.
and then again after 3 years we still again underwater. It's a huge amount of water and like there is no way because like literally those riverbeds are gone, the rivers were dry, and now all of a sudden monsoon and like cloud burst we see, never saw that before. And
When
now
you were a kid, was it like this at all? Like, what was it like when you were a kid?
Oh my goodness, no, like it was not like that at all. It
Yeah,
like used to rain and pour like for days and days, and now we don't see rain for months. And I'm
yeah.
from like I grew up at a farm. Like we had a piece of land where we used to grow a lot of different crops, but we're not able to use grow those crops anymore. And it's kind
Yeah.
of like so like kind of sad to see how like the government and people like especially the vulnerable, especially women and children, like literally dying. And we see videos, kids are literally like throwing their bodies of their like dead mother in the water, like by themselves, like 8, 10 years old. And there is no help because the country's like almost, there's a report says like by 2050 you have to spend 20% of your GDP on tackling climate change, and there is no action, unfortunately. So it's like kind of so sad to see in terms of policymakers and media and those entities, and not like kind of who are like kind of, it seems like a nexus, like not to do anything and block everything. So I just want to ask like on a media part, because I do a lot of kind of analyze how media talk about climate change. And yes, they have more frequent attributions that is climate change is happening, but like again, there are a lot of pieces missing from these stories, especially contextual based information, that why they don't frame it, like why thematic framing is still missing, why we are seeing this, and why how we can stop this. But I wanted to ask like about cops, a little bit about loss and damage fund, and like how the rich global north countries
Hmm.
can or cannot do anything about helping those global south countries which pollute less, the environment, and like kind of contributing less CO2, emitting less, but they're seeing more extreme effects of climate change. So how do you see cops? Do you think it's just a show that like all of thousands of people just fly over and get together, and like we put a CEO of a fossil fuel industry guy and then expect something different as a result?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's exactly what I think it is. I don't believe we're going to have any meaningful progress at the international level until they say no more fossil fuel corporation participation. And a year ago, I happened to meet John Kerry, the Secretary of State at the time, at an event. And he was, I think somehow involved in organizing the cops. And I was like, hey, like the biggest delegate, I kind of was talking to him like, the biggest delegation at the Conference of Parties meetings is the fossil fuel industry. And I'm, I'm a climate scientist. I'm really worried we're not going to make progress until they stop calling the shots at these meetings. It just seems really obvious to me. They're not good actors. They're not acting in good faith. He got really mad at me. He
Hmm.
was like, what are you talking about? We've gotten more out of the fossil fuel industry this last COP than we ever have before. Like they're an instrumental part of this process or something like that. And then he left. Like I just had a few seconds to chat with him, and my mind was blown. And I'm like, I had a similar feeling to when 2 years into the first Obama term, so two years into the Obama presidency, when a light bulb clicked and I realized, oh, he doesn't share my agenda.
Hmm.
He does not share my progressive agenda on climate change. And that's why he's not doing anything. And it was the same thing with John Kerry. I'm like, oh, like he doesn't see the fossil fuel industry as a problem,
Hmm.
which is crazy to me because there's such a huge mountain of evidence now, a huge
Yeah.
paper trail, all these documents that show that they've been systematically colluding with each other. They've been hiring some of the best PR people in the
Yes.
world, the best lobbyists. They literally got together and said, okay, how can the public will start to want to transition away from fossil fuels when they realize that we're irreversibly destroying the planet that they live on. So how can we keep them from seeing that? How can we lie and prevent, and how can we undermine the scientists and make it seem like there's more doubt than there really is? So they've been being incredibly dishonest for decades. They haven't paid any price for that yet. They have not been held accountable for what I think is probably the greatest corporate crime in the history of humanity, because it's like you were talking about what's happening in Pakistan, which is already in present day incredibly horrifying and
Yeah.
sad. What I'm trying to let everyone know is this is still just the beginning. It's going to get worse and worse.
Yeah.
I really believe that if we stay on the track that we're on in the process of seeing billions of deaths,
Mhm.
not millions of deaths, but billions with a B. That because we're going to start seeing crop failures. We're going to start seeing increasing famines. I mean, it's sad to be talking about this like this. Then we're gonna see like the undermining of geopolitical stability, which I feel is already starting to happen. Like,
Already happening. Oh, yes, absolutely.
yeah,
Like Pakistan and India, they're always constant tension because India flood the water, like they leave the water and it's gonna like, like increase the level in the rivers in Pakistan. And it's always like, oh, should we build dams? It's like we have Indus Water Treaty. They always violate. Sometimes they tell that we're gonna
yeah,
release this amount of water. Sometimes they don't. So there's always like a geopolitical tension between these two nuclear countries because of water,
yeah.
because of the weather patterns.
Yeah, I agree. And probably increasingly because of food, which is the same thing as
Yes,
water.
absolutely.
Water basically equals food.
Mhm.
If you have water, you can grow food, and if you don't, you can't. Increasingly, heat's going to be a more of a part of that equation too. Like even if you have water, it might start to get too hot.
Yeah, in
Um,
2015, 1,500 people died in one city in Pakistan because of the heat. And the
yeah,
temperature goes like literally 120 Fahrenheit degree and sometimes it goes
yeah.
even 126, 130 in some parts of the country.
And then, you're kind of like your average white person in the United States feels like it can't happen here, and they're wrong.
Yeah,
They're
absolutely.
completely wrong.
Yeah.
Yes, like I think extreme heat will get worse in the subcontinent first, but it's going to get bad everywhere around the whole planet,
Yeah.
including in the United States. There's going to be, I think in our lifetimes, maybe even relatively soon, we will start seeing heat waves with death tolls in the millions.
Yeah.
We have
So,
never seen
so
that before.
what do you suggest or think that because you're a very strong activist and there are like very few voices unfortunately who are like have some voice and they're not raising their voice. But what do you suggest or recommend to scientists or institutions or academics to kind of do more, just not because it's more comfortable to do produce research, like keep it in your desktop, move on, get the grants, get your life, that's it. And it's less comfortable being arrested, being, raising questions, being, kind of able to protest. So how do you kind of see that as activism, as an academics, and how we should be doing things and what we're getting wrong and what we should be doing more?
Well, I would love to see a groundswell in scientists, especially climate scientists, speaking out a lot more, first of all, speaking really clearly and, not telling the public to stay calm, right? I think that's the wrong message right now. I would love to see more climate scientists really directly explaining that this is a human caused problem and that fossil fuel executives and fossil fuel corporations have been lying for decades. That's really, really important for the public to know. I think there's a huge, if there's a chain like that will lead us to responding to this problem in a rational way, there's a really big broken link, which is that I don't think the public knows that. So let's say you're a person and you realize that it's getting hotter and you're worried about climate change. Um, in general, I don't think the public has enough awareness that this problem is because of the fossil fuel industry.
Yeah.
Like, I've heard way too many people tell me that, like they say like, oh, are you worried about climate change? And they're like, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, what do you think we should do to stop it? And they tell me we should recycle more,
Yeah.
right? Like, and my mind is just blown. They don't say like, oh, we have to end the fossil fuel industry and transition to different forms of energy, right? Which is the correct answer. We don't even convince policymakers to adopt rational policy.
Based on
So this
data.
is how irrational we are as a kind of society right now, right? So the contract is scientists, funded largely by the government grants, are supposed to understand reality. And if they see a problem, so whether it's like a pandemic or the earth getting too hot or, whatever it is, they sound the alarm and they go have, the most senior scientists go have meetings with the president. This is like in the movies, right? And the president says, "Oh gosh, like this is a real problem." And then, maybe it's in the movie, it's too late. So there's these disasters, but at least they try to do something about it. They don't say like, oh, like, screw you, scientists. I don't believe you. I'm gonna like do my own research. I'm gonna listen to these deniers. I'm gonna like put somebody in charge of vaccines who's anti-vax, right? That's not supposed to happen. So the contract has been broken, right? So scientists have to realize if they care about this planet and if they care about their children, and I know they do, they can't wait for somebody else to save us. And I feel like scientists as a group, as a collective, we would have a lot of power if we all, with one voice, started to say what was really going on, started to call out the fossil fuel industry and the politicians, both in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, who aren't doing enough, but especially the actual climate deniers. And, you know, started and then, we're able to let our emotions show a little bit so that people who aren't scientists knew how serious we think this is, right?
Yep.
And then
Absolutely.
potentially even engage in civil disobedience like I have and a few other scientists have. Um, the civil disobedience I've done uh, has been the most effective way of communicating to the public that this is actually an emergency. It's better than writing books. It's better than
Yeah.
writing articles. It's a lot better than writing research articles about, you know, coral reefs dying, for example.
Which is also behind the paywall most of the time, but yeah.
Most of the time, yeah. Increasingly, I think earth scientists are publishing their work outside of the paywalls. But yes, but the public's not really going to sit down. You have a very small fraction of the public who's like reading Scientific American, listening to
Yeah.
the Science Friday podcast, right? And they kind of get it. They might not read. Some of them may read the actual scientific papers, but they're going to be reading, the New York Times article about the scientific paper. So they get it. They probably understand that fossil fuel industry is the main culprit here of why the planet's getting hotter. But that's a tiny fraction of the population,
Yeah, true.
right?
Or
So
or
how,
maybe they will read Fox News twisted headline from a paper which has, like
right,
a very different meaning. But yeah.
right. So this is my mom. So you asked earlier, like, have I convinced climate deniers in my life that climate change is real? So she thinks that I've been brainwashed by the left to believe in climate change, and so I haven't made any progress with her because she does watch Fox News. So yeah, Fox News is not going to probably have me on to talk about climate change, or other scientists like me. There's a very small handful of very either misguided or greedy
Hmm.
people with scientific credentials who tell lies about climate change and
Or
who say,
minimize, yeah, or minimize
yeah,
changes, yeah.
yeah, the sort of crank scientists. And Fox News will have them on because they have the like PhD and
Of course.
they
Yeah,
were
expert
formally
cues.
like,
They have expert cues, so people gonna believe them.
right.
Yeah.
But yeah, like for every one of them, there's like 10,000 other climate scientists who say, yes, there's a huge amount of evidence that
Yeah.
says the planet's getting hotter. That's what's causing the flooding. That's what's causing all this stuff. It's going to get worse. It's caused by fossil fuels, right? So Fox News won't have them on.
Yeah.
So then how do and even people who don't watch Fox News don't really, there's just so much confusion about the planet getting hotter. Is it getting hotter? What does that mean? How do we stop it? Where's this going to take us? And it's very hard to get the real information
Mhm.
to a large number of people.
True.
Um, so like you're having me
That's
on your
a big struggle.
podcast,
That's a big struggle. That's why I started like this work as my outreach. I was
yeah,
like, you know what? I'm writing papers. I'm trying to, like talk to people, but maybe it's a good idea to raise awareness. If like 10,000 people listen to me, 5,000 people listen to me, even they're not convinced, but I shared something, just keep like kind of, yeah, inviting people, keep talking about it with as many people as possible. It's better to talk with one person than not talking to one person.
right, yeah,
You never know.
and
But
yeah.
yes, go ahead, please.
Well, I also the other piece, like, yeah, I don't have access to talk to a lot of those people. Like, I don't have that big of a microphone. I used to have like a medium-sized microphone on Twitter until Elon Musk bought it. And uh, but even if I did, like for somebody to actually hear what I'm saying,
Yeah.
they would have to decide they trust me.
Mhm.
And right now, I I would say that the working class left and the working class right have
Mhm.
essentially been divided by the wealthy class, by this
Absolutely.
billionaire class, which owns a lot of the media,
Yeah.
right? And so I will be perceived by people on the right as someone as one of them, as
Yes.
on the left,
Yeah.
right? So it's very hard for me then to,
Fine.
which is why like I would love to start talking to, I think, some of the farmers who maybe already understand that the earth is heating up, because they could be really good messengers
Yeah.
to people on the right who
True.
would actually trust them.
Yeah. That's a good point. So before I let you go, I just want to ask one last question is what are some of the things or maybe one thing we're not talking about as a society? It can be related to climate change or something else.
Probably, I would say we're not talking enough about how the Earth getting hotter is leading to more far right kind of movements in various countries. So I think there's actually a connection between global heating and the rise of fascism, like this xenophobia, wanting to close borders, for example, this like general sense of fear that things aren't going well, which makes a populace susceptible to authoritarianism. And so I think that should be studied by a lot more academics, that connection. Because I think we're going to see a lot more, unfortunately, a lot more authoritarianism in the future as the planet heats up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again, Dr. Peter Kalmus. It was honor, absolutely honored to talk with you, and thank you for your time. Appreciate
Thank
that.
you.